Thank you for coming to this first class. We're all learners, even myself. So please forgive me. I'm not great at public speaking, but I try. So we may have a few people trickle in or out. If anybody doesn't know where the restrooms are, if you do need them, don't worry, just feel free to step out. The closest women's restroom is this building right here. There's a pavilion and there's a door right there on the side. Feel free to use that one. The men's restroom, the closest one, is going to be out this building. Once you're facing that direction, if you go left to the dining hall, there's a red door on the side and it has a bathroom symbol. Just go through there and it's the straight ahead restroom is the men's restroom. Same thing if you find yourself needing water or anything like that, the dining hall is where you can get it if you need go get it. I know my throat's dry today, so it's a hot day. So, just like they do in college, let me make sure you're in the right class. This is the Basics of Buddhism, or Buddhism 101. I've prepared some notes today for kind of what I feel might be just appropriate to start with. My original thought was we could do it as a Q&A session. If at any point everybody decides, hey, that's kind of a nice way I'd like to go about it, let me know. But it's also Q&A, so we're going to go over topics, but at the same time, as you come up with questions, keep them in your head, write them down, whatever your preference. If it's something I can't answer, we will find the answer for you. If it's some of the deeper Dharma-based questions, that may be something we need to talk with the monastic about. And you can always do one-on-one sessions, if you will, with monastics to ask them bigger questions. So this is literally like baby Buddhism 101. We're not going to go down too many rabbit holes. That is a real thing. We can dive real deep, but we're going to try to stay at the surface so we can breathe. And then, like I said, it'll just depend kind of if people end up having questions, of course, ask them. Even if they go a little deeper, I'll do my best to answer. A little bit about myself. My name is Tan An Theng, is my Vietnamese Buddhist name. And my English given name is Marissa. So, Thai's here. There's Stephen. Hi, Stephen. Okay. Just checking in. So, if you haven't met him before, that's our abbot of this monastery, of the temple. So, all the monastics live here. As far as the male monks, we do have nuns as well. They live in Austin, but they sometimes will come and stay here temporarily to help out with things depending on what's going on. But their main location that they stay is in Austin. It's like our little satellite temple. They have events and things there too that we try to post on our Facebook. So if you ever see that and get a chance literally from here in traffic, it's probably about an hour and 5 minutes. So with my wife Amaya for about 13 years. We used to live down the street, so we would just kind of walk the peaceful grounds and see what was up. And at that time, nobody spoke English except for one monastic here who is currently in Taiwan. He's our youngest monastic. He is 21 years old. He started when he was itty bitty. He wanted at like 3 years old to become a monastic, and they told him, well, hold on, let's kind of let you grow a little bit and see. And so he'd come to the temple and be a pseudo-monastic until he got to a certain age, and then he joined as a monastic and learning. So if you ever get to see him, he's great. His name's Pan Lu, but he'll be gone for a very long time. So this temple, we're going to talk a little bit about what is practiced at this temple specifically, because there are many different sects of Buddhism. But there are 3 main sects. And then, I'm literally skating on the tip of the ice of that one. I'm not going to go deep into that yet, because that's a whole other class worth of information. So, the 3 main sects are Theravada, Mahayana, and I always pronounce this one wrong, so forgive me, Vajrayana. So we practice at this particular temple monastery the Mahayana version of Buddhism. So it's called, the other word you may hear for Mahayana is the Great Vehicle. I'm not going to dive far. We're just going to stay right there for right now. We'll do that in another class. I'm going to first ask Does everybody know who Buddha is / was? Is everybody aware? Is anybody not aware? Does anybody need a refresher? Don't feel shy. It's okay if you don't. This is the place. No judgment, no whatever. Okay. Everybody's comfortable with that. All right. So I'll kind of describe things that we're going to go over just the basics of what you see around the temple first, the reasons why we do certain things, because there's always a lot of questions, especially when you first come here, like, what is all this stuff? What does that mean? Why do you wear robes? What are these? Like, what is that? Why do we use those? Or do I have to use those? That's always a question too. Is it like mandatory? So I'll talk just briefly about that. At any point, if you have a question, or if I'm talking too fast, you're not gonna offend me, blurt something out, raise your hand, whatever you want, just tell me. If you're like, yo, too fast, I got it. Just let me know. So first, I'll start with, what are the robes we wear? So a lot of times, you'll see both in the English sangha and in the Vietnamese community, you'll see everyone wearing these, as far as lay practitioners. And lay practitioners means us as non-monastics. So the robes are not like a mandatory necessity. It does a couple different things. The main and biggest thing it does is it tells us to let go of ego. Ego is a big notion in Buddhism that we try all the time to make sure that we're letting it go, and we're human, so we're always going to have moments of that. But we learn throughout practice to let go more and more of that. So by ego, it also means the sense of non-judgment. And non-judgment comes in the way of uniformity. So when I see myself in this, when I feel the fabric, it reminds me that we're all unified, we're all one. So I'm you, you are me, we're all in this together, we all suffer, we all are humans, and we experience human things. So when I see somebody else with that same notion, it's a reminder to myself. And most everything, pretty literally mean everything that you see in Buddhism, is meant as that. It's always a reminder for himself to come back to these practices of practice, to come back to these notions within Buddhism. So they're not mandatory. For me personally, it helps me to practice deeper. It's just like a tactile thing for me. I'm a tactile visual person, so feeling it there helps me. Kai does also generally like uniformity, so yes, he likes seeing it, like everybody look all pretty-eyed. So in the Vietnamese community, you'll see everybody wearing robes, like everybody. So it's not like any hierarchy or anything like that. It's just simply a way of reminding yourself how to practice. The other thing that you see is mala beads, and they come in all varieties. So they come in necklaces, big beads, little beads, plastic, glass, wood. I don't necessarily know if there's a true meaning behind the type of woods and things. I know that in some ways, for example, these beads are a little bit more special than just perhaps run-of-the-mill beads. And the reasoning why is because these beads are actually called the Buddha eye, and it's a seed that comes off of the Bodhi trees in India and in some of the East Asian countries, and they string them together like that. These were given to me by Kai, by Sifu, our abbot here at the monastery. It was a really special gift. I still feel awkward having them, but they're beautiful. And so in that way, they were preyed on by monastics, and so they are thus special, but the special comes from who thinks they're special, right? So it's not because, oh wow, she's got special. No, they're special to me because they have meaning, but it doesn't mean that they're any better than what you have. Just special in the way of that. We use mala beads for a couple different things. Again, a lot of it is reminder. Most mala beads in the way of necklaces typically have 108 beads. And the 108 beads, and I'm just sticking on the surface here because we can go deep on this rabbit hole, is believed to be in Buddhism what's called the 108 sufferings of mankind. So they did some research throughout Buddhism and said, hey, there's 108 different ways that we found that humans suffer. And so it's an acknowledgement of that. So some people literally count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way around, and they keep on going back to 108. Some people use it as and it's meant as a meditative focus. So some people use them to say mantras. For example, one of the more basic mantras is Om Mane Padme Om. And essentially, breaking that down, it's the mantra of compassion. And so people will say it over and over again, and there's a few ways you can do it. Most often they recommend hold one bead, and in your head or aloud, depending on your preference or where you're practicing, you would say Om Mane Padme Om, next beat. Om Mane Padme Om, next beat. Om Mane Padme Om. And the idea is you try to say it quickly, but understanding what you're saying, so that it gives you a way of focusing, and that's a form of meditation. So, especially like my mind likes to jump. So I use mantras a lot, or counting. I have ADHD. So that's one way. Some people use a counting method, and you don't have to do those things with mala beads. Sometimes it just helps to keep you focused. Again, it's a tactile reminder. So you can also, there's a practice where you count to 10. And if you don't make it to 10, if you catch your mind drifting on number 3, you start over again. And it's not meant as a thing to make you frustrated. It's just meant as a reminder of a sense of awareness, so that you understand that your mind just needs a little bit more practice in the way of mindfulness. And it's not something to beat yourself up about. I guarantee you, every monastic, Dalai Lama, whoever monastic you want to call out, they all experience the same things. Just because they've practiced a long time doesn't mean they still don't experience these things. They're human just like we are. Even the Buddha experienced those things. So if you were using that practice, you'd start at your main bead, and it honestly could be whatever bead you want. It doesn't have to be like the one that's in the middle. And you would say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now if I catch my brain going, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? I go, wait a second. Okay, hold on, I lost track. Not just of the number, because I might be able to remember, well, number 5's next, I'm going to keep going. But it's more just the like, okay, I realize that I'm not being mindful, that I'm not present in my own body right now. And then you go back. You don't have to go all the way back to the beginning. You can start from where you're from and just go 1, 2. Maybe you only make it to 2 next time. Or 1, or not at all. I've been there, I've done that. So it just depends on how you care to practice. That's really what they're meant for. You will call them, some people call them prayer beads. It's similar to like the Catholic way of a rosary, if you've ever heard of that. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you pray on these that a prayer per se goes up to some entity that will grant it. It's just a self-practice. So that's the basics of that. All right, one of the other things I wanted to touch baseline on, because I've had questions about this in the past. If you look at some of the Buddha statues, this one doesn't have one, but if you look in the Buddha hall later on, the smaller Buddha that's sitting, with his hands like this, he has a swastika on his chest. And some people go, oh, when they see that, and they're like, why does Buddha have a swastika on his chest? And so let me preface that by saying swastikas existed long before Hitler and the negative things that he tried to make that mean. And unfortunately, the history still sticks. But you will see it in not only just Buddhism, you'll see it in a lot of other religions too. But forgive me, my mind scatters, so I've written some of this down, so I will read at times, okay? So it is a universal symbol of harmony, prosperity, plurality, good luck, abundance. It symbolizes dharma. I mean, the list goes on and on for the things that a swastika embodies. The word itself, swastika, is actually derived from a Sanskrit word, which is the original Buddhist language, was in Sanskrit. And so broken down, you have su, which means good or auspicious. United, or asti, which is it is. Along with a suffix, which is ka, so like swastika, ka. And so the swastika literally means it is good or all is well. That's the physical translation of that word. And it's, like I said, it's used worldwide. So you'll see it in Egyptian culture, Romans, Greeks, the Celts, Native Americans, Persians. You'll see it in a lot of places. But a lot of people, especially in the current culture, stopped using it because of that association and how it gained what it gained with Hitler. But it's not a negative symbol, and you'll often see it backwards. So backwards in Buddhism, it doesn't necessarily mean any one particular thing. We call it, so Buddhists use counterclockwise, backwards. And that, when you see it counterclockwise, it's supposed to remind you of destruction of ego and your vices. So that's what it's helped. Again, it's another reminder. Every time you see it, there are forms of meditation where you don't have to have your eyes closed. One of the original setups of Buddhist practice, and that's why you often see Buddha with open eyes, not necessarily like this, but you'll see him with his eyes gently gazing downward. And that's also one of the basic notions of some practices where they tell you how to meditate very specifically. There's a whole, somebody made this whole thing on like, how does one meditate with their body literally? Like, what position do you sit? How, where does your back have to be? Does your butt get elevated? Like, there's this whole setup for it. And if we get a little time, we can go into kind of the notion of like, how does one sit comfortably? Number one is practice, but number two, there's some other bodily things you can do to help. So the next thing I want to talk about is what you see on an altar. So if you look at the various altars throughout the temple grounds, the monastery grounds, there's one in here, obviously. There's one in what we call the prayer hall, which is the building that's connected and behind where we usually meditate in the Buddha hall. So it's in the same building, it's just on the back side. And just as a side note, anybody who wants to come during the week, not with an English sangha, like on Sundays and what have you, if you just want to come and find some meditative peace for yourself, you're welcome to come anytime that the gates are open, and you can sit in that prayer hall. It's open all the time. We don't usually have the big Buddha hall open because unfortunately there's a large prevalence of people who are homeless or houseless, and we've had some people, wander in there and try to stay a little longer than just for meditation. So just to discourage people, that's why we have this door open, because there's usually people who can see it readily. But yeah, you're welcome to come anytime. You don't have to have permission to walk around or sit on rocks or a chair or something. That's okay. Nobody will eat you. Okay, so one of the first things you see, or smell rather, are incense. And so there are sensors that you'll see depending on where you're at. So for example, this is a sensor right here. And sensor literally means an object that holds incense. Sometimes, like there's a middle sensor in front of Buddha, you'll see that's a sensor. It holds stick incense. So the smell of incense and the smoke itself is, again, I'm going to stop saying it after this, always self-reminders. So all these things I'm about to describe, just remember they are a tool for you. There's something you can use within your practice of meditation, eyes open or closed, that you can focus on during your meditation, depending on how you want to practice. So there's lots and lots of ways to meditate. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. It's just what works for you. So incense and / the fragrance you smell. So it's meant to help awaken the heart to a level of consciousness, to help guide you to the understanding of a moral compass and ethics. Some people you'll see do like a bathing of smoke, right? And that can be a purifying sense of the body, heart, soul, face. It's to help you face the negative karma and to endure changes and obstacles. When you smell it, it should bring that sense to you, that reminder, okay, I smell the fragrance, and okay, I can smell. I can smell. How often do we think about that? Like, how often do you connect with your actual sense of smell? Not just like, oh, somebody farted. But like literally, you're like, oh, that smells nice. And then you think even deeper, oh, I have the ability to smell. Some people might not be able to, right? COVID came around. Some people literally can't smell. or some people have other medical conditions that may prevent them from knowing that sense. So it's the acknowledgement of the gratitude that you have the ability to do that, and others may not. Flowers. Oh, don't make a liar out of it. They don't have to be real. We're lucky enough to have real flowers, oftentimes just orchids. Orchids are kind of like a sense of the lotus flower, which is the sense of purity. The lotus flower specifically symbolizes enlightenment. That's a whole other subject. But in its basis, a lot of times you'll see Buddha on any given statue, he'll either be standing or sitting or sometimes even lying on a lotus flower. So if you look at the ones here, you'll actually see that they look like there's petals underneath them, and that's exactly what it is. It's an open lotus flower. That's because where Buddha walked, there was enlightenment. They also are a sense of reminder for us that life is impermanent, that all things are impermanent. That is Buddhism at its basis. That one phrase right there is something you take with you everywhere you go and pass that along. Everything is impermanent. Everything in general, like the stable, it lives, if you will, and eventually it will decay. It dies. This bell, albeit it'll take a long time because it's metal, it will decay. We live, we die. Flowers live, they die. And so oftentimes, especially here in the temple spaces, you'll see the live flowers as they are, and then you'll also see the actual dead flowers that have fallen onto the altar, and they will leave them. And a lot of people are like, oh man, they left that mess there, what's up with that? Like, anybody cleaning this altar? And that's just meant literally as a reminder, because it's showing you, hey, this is beautiful, and it's here, and it's lived its life, and now it's actually dying, it's decaying, it's impermanent. And that's one of those big reminders is the sense of flowers or plant life. It doesn't necessarily have to be a flower, but I think they go through a cycle a little faster, so it's a better reminder. Quicker basis. Orchid lasts a while though, so there's that. Fruits, you'll often see fruits, so there's 2 melons there on the other side. I have asked this question myself before, and I haven't really gotten a clear answer if there's a specific meaning to the majority of fruit that are offered, with one exception. A lot of times around Lunar New Year, January, depending on the calendar. We don't follow Gregorian calendars in the lunar. We follow a lunar calendar. So you'll see oranges, or like mandarin oranges, the small oranges, and you're like, why so many oranges? And especially, they'll change it out to where you'll see, especially around Lunar New Year, you'll see the oranges up on the altar. And oranges are just, they come with their own little history throughout Buddhism and throughout culture, where they were given as a way of like blessing. And so a lot of times during the Lunar New Year, if you go through the Buddha Hall, the big temple, there will be a monastic in there, or a nun, or other words. I'm going to throw you some words here. Bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. Those are other terms you may hear. Bhikkhu and bhikkhuni just means monk and nun. But those are monks and nuns who have obtained a higher level of practice. It's not just like beginner monks. So they will actually pray over them, give them, good energy, good vibe, send as much goodness into them as they can through the version of prayer, and then they give them out to the community as a way. And you're supposed to eat them. So don't just like put it up on your altar and let it rot away. Like, actually eat it. It's legit. Like, it's meant to eat. And you're like, oh, I'm gonna keep my good luck. Well, ingest it. And again, it's that same basic premise. It's meant to, symbolize the idea that when you eat food, you're nourishing your body. When you nourish your body, you have the ability to, and have the energy, the power for your mind to do the work that it needs to do. Literally the work. It could be whatever you want it to be, meditation, doing good deeds, karma, all that is, it helps. And so again, a reminder, we are fortunate enough, A, to be able to eat, B, to have food. Not everyone has that. And it also is that impermanence. Our food does decay. It's impermanent. It lives, it dies. So don't take advantage of it. That's another basic practice in Buddhism around food, is that you eat only what you need to sustain, and you try not to waste as much as possible. So a lot of times, if you've ever been invited here at the monastery to eat with the community, it's good practice to serve yourself only what you know you can and will eat. You can always come back for more if there's more for left, but always try just to serve what you feel you can. I don't want to say sustain, because you need appropriate nutrition, but sustain in the way that it's the correct amount of calories for you. Like, no one should go around like totally cutting the calories back because they don't want to waste. And of course it happens, I'll be honest. Like, there's times I'll come here and I'm like, oh, what is that? And you're like, oh boy. So maybe it's something that you don't necessarily, you don't know what it is, but you're willing to try it, and it's maybe not your favorite thing in the world. It happens, it's okay. Like, if you spit it out politely, it's okay. It's just one of those notions to remember, and then just know next time, if you don't like it, don't serve yourself that. The other thing you'll see up there, if you look at there's like 2 crystal lotus flowers on either side of the center in the middle, and those are water containers, vessels, if you will. They are meant to hold water. And when you see those vessels, or if you see physical water in front of you in that way on an altar, it's that love, kindness, the clarity of thoughts. It helps to cleanse the karma that we accumulate, clarity of mind, and then the notions of cause and effect. Everything we do is cause and effect. And that is no one's responsibility or fault than your own. And that's a hard concept for most humans, who especially hold very tightly to ego, to let go of. That you are responsible for everything that you think and feel. So if I came up to you and said, man, I think you are just the worst. I mean, that's harsh, right? And who knows if I know her or not. That's my mom. If I'm picking on her nose. So if I said that, I can only control my own thoughts, actions, and feelings, right? So I can't control what she may think of me. If she said that to me, right? I can't control that. I can't, well, let me tell you how good I am. I could do that, but does that change anything? No, I can't jump into her mind. So the only thing you can control are your own actions. And my favorite story that I love to tell is the notion of the gift. And so if I say to you, or someone says to me, Marissa, you're just awful. Like, whatever you did, blah, 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 whatever. It was just terrible. You're a terrible human being. Well, if I get angry or upset at that, and I maybe don't even show it outwardly, but let's say that really sinks into me, and I'm sitting with that, and I stew in it, and I go home, right? Regardless of whatever interaction happened, I go home, and it wakes me up at night. I'm just laying in bed thinking about it. Or, the next day I'm eating breakfast, and it's all I can think about. I'm giving my own self a gift. That's not a gift, if you will. My anger, my frustration, a lot of times we want that gift to be given back to the person who hurt us. We want them to know how angry and frustrated and hurt we were by whatever occurrence it was. But it's more about how we deal with it inwardly. It's not about, because we can't necessarily, I can do horrible things or say horrible things and do all those things, but really in reality, I'm still just giving my own self that gift. I'm giving myself the anger. I'm giving myself the frustration. So that's what I mean by giving a gift. You're not really giving it as a gift to somebody else. You're really gifting it back to yourself. And so that gift can be a negative thing. I know, it's one of those first things that I heard that I was like, it just blew my mind. I didn't really ever think of it like that, because we think about the immediacy of it. And it's okay. It's not to say you shouldn't. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to be angry. Just try your best, and it is a practice. If you're a person who typically would lash out, the first step is to try to not lash out. Take that with you. If it's a person you have to talk to, say, you know what, I really do want to discuss this more, but I need some time. to think about that, or to really come up with the appropriate things that I feel we can discuss. And then you walk away. That's hard sometimes to do, I get it, depends on situations that you're in. So take that with a grain of salt. It's a practice. It applies to a lot of situations. That was just water. So candlelight. Sometimes you'll see physical candles or oil lamps lit. Sometimes it'll be in the form of little small lights on the altar or in the big Buddha hall. You know those big spire lights that we have on either side of Buddha, or there's a big things we don't. Like the backward lights, the candles with the oil lamps, all one and the same. You don't have to have a lit candle; it can be just a light. And so that light is meant to help dispel ignorance, calm harsh feelings, helps you to connect with pure wisdom, the stability that's there, and the clarity of patience. So when you see light, you use it as those reminders, like, okay. It's that purity, like come back to this notion. Again, you can take it further and say like it's the ability to not take for granted what we have, that we have access to either electricity or some form of light, the sun. You can take it that far if you want to go that far. I mean, the sun is not always a given. We assume it is, but it could just go blip any minute now, right? We're all done with them. We don't know when that'll happen or if it will happen. So, you know, just those always coming back to those little reminders too of that nothing is permanent and it could be taken away from you at any moment. This breath is this breath. The next breath is the next breath. The past breaths, those existed. We don't think about those anymore. We're on this one, and this one or the next one, those could be your last at any moment. So don't take that for granted. You're here. Be with it. It's hard. It's really hard. But it's a practice, and that's why they call it that. It's not like the meditation. It's not like an end game goal. You don't just stop there. It's always a practice throughout our life. So a lot of people are like, I need to get this right. They get really frustrated. Like, dang it, you know, like today I just really did horrible at meditating. And there's no wrong way. Actually, a lot of people have this misconcept that when you meditate, you have to have this blank mind. And that is the opposite of most of the time what it should be. What you should be essentially doing is just being acknowledging that you are having thoughts, emotions, being present with that. And one of the big mistakes I made when I first started meditating, and I'll be honest, I only just recently learned this, because I thought I had this understanding. It was only when I heard some Dharma discussion with some other people elsewhere that it just like, all of a sudden I was like, oh, wait a second. And then I really reflected for a moment on my own practice, and I was like, yo, like I've been doing that wrong. So a lot of times I'm okay with, like, I can sit in my mind as kind of like, if you imagine yourself being another person kind of sitting in a chair and just watching a movie, right? Watching it happen. So you're watching your thoughts and emotions. And then my problem is I didn't realize that this was the practice I wasn't doing. I was sitting in the chair and I was watching those emotions. But I was like, yo, you can't stick around, you gotta go. Leave, this ain't the place. Instead of being like, oh, whoa. Okay, what is this feeling? What just came into the room? Oh, it's anger, or sadness, or depression, or whatever you want, but happiness. Happiness, it doesn't always have to be bad things. It could be like, oh man, I can't wait to go home and try out the new TV I just plugged in. You know, like whatever it is. You sit with that for a moment, and you recognize it, and you say, okay, so we'll hit on happiness. This is happiness. This is like straight joy. Like, I am really excited about this TV. But then you say to yourself, okay, well, where am I right now? Well, I'm with the TV. I'm not here with me right now. I'm with the TV at my house. And so it's that click, that go, oh, okay, I recognize that I was wandering. My brain was not in the present moment. I was not connected with my body. I was elsewhere in my head. I was thinking about dinner. I was thinking about the kids. I was thinking about the spouse, like whatever it is, right? I was thinking about my car problems, my work, my keep going and going, right? But the whole idea of meditation is to say, okay, I acknowledge there's a whole lot going on right now. I'm going to sit with each one of those as long as I can to fully understand it. as best I can. Sometimes it's not in one session. So like if something's really bugging you and you're sitting with it and you're like, just eating at my soul, you really have to sit multiple times with that to understand that emotion or whatever it is for you that's happening. And then it's not necessarily even that you have to let go of it. Eventually it's good if you can at least let it pass. And then you recognize the next thing. And sometimes you may have those moments where you're meditating and then all of a sudden there's just nothing. There is that void, that silence. And that's what Kai refers to as touching true happiness, or the Buddha mind. It's the acknowledgement, it's that you have understood suffering for that moment in time. And suffering is good and bad, and we'll talk about that in a hot second. One last thing about the basis of things you see us doing, and then we're going to get into an actual little bit of Dharma discussion, if you will, about a practice in Buddhism called the Four Noble Truths. So, the last thing that I want to talk about, and just kind of what you see around here, is the act of bowing, or what we call prostrating. And so, I don't want to turn my booty to you, so I'll do it this way. A lot of times you'll see we're all facing Buddha, and we all have our hands here at the chest. And then you'll see some people just stay here, and that's fine. Some people come up here, and then as you hear the bell, it goes ding, and you go boom, boom, bing, right? And then you go down. And when you go down, some people you'll see will place their head on a small cushion and their palms will go face up. Then you hear a ding. You either come here or some people come right back here. My personal preference is to do this part. You don't have to do this. You don't even have to bow. It's a matter of self-practice and what you feel helps you. We do it as a form of respect for what's called the three jewels. In Buddhism, that's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So Buddha is pretty obvious, right? Who that is. But we don't bow to him to worship him. We bow out of respect and the letting go of ego. So when we bow, if I bow to you, I'm saying I'm letting go of my ego. I'm no better than you, I'm not higher than you, but I'm also not lower than you. I'm just saying, like, I'm letting it go. Like, whatever it is, I'm just letting go of that ego. So we do that to all those things. So we pay respect by bowing to the Buddha and his teachings. So that's the second one, which is the Dharma, it's Buddha's teachings. The things that Buddha said, this is Buddhism, this is how we practice. And then the last thing, if you've never heard this term before, is sangha. And sangha essentially is the Buddhist community. It entails monastics, lay people, new people, anybody. Anybody who's coming to one congregatory place to be together is considered sangha. And we call ourselves lay practitioners, L-A-Y, lay. It just means that we have not taken the vows of monasticism to become monks, to live that path in that way. We're just people practicing Buddhism, as simple as it is. That's super simple, right? Rock it. Whoa, all right. I'm gonna jump to this. This is one of those things, a lot of people think that when you learn about the Four Noble Truths that it's a really big topic, and I'll be really frank with you, it's not. It's super simple. Simple but not. But it's simple. I mean, it's the gist of it. There are some more complicated topics, like for example, Pai or Sifu, you'll hear some of us call him, the abbot. He's been going over, starting to go over the Eightfold Path. I don't want to confuse you, it's a part of Buddhism, just know that for right now. But it does tie in somewhat to the Four Noble Truths. And it's just one of those fundamental things in Buddhism. This is like the original. This is what Buddha said. This is the way you do it. If you do it this way, you'll suffer less. Legit. But he didn't make it complicated. He was like, look, we just do this. You're like, yeah, right, dude. So I'm going to say what they are, and then I'll just briefly go into what they generally cover, what they mean. If you have questions, we'll go over that if I have time, which I sincerely doubt. I also had prepared in here what some of the Bodhisattvas, or if you're familiar with Catholicism or Christianity, you may have heard the word saints. similarity as far as what they are. So like a lot of the statues you see around here, like, what is that? Like, who is that? I thought we just did Buddha. Like, what is that? So yeah, you're like, wait. Why? I have some information on them as well. So we may be able to stick around or whatnot. I just want to give everyone the opportunity to have a break if you're coming to meditation. So there's that. So we'll go briefly into the Four Noble Truths. If you have questions, again, please just, hey Marisa or whatever, just yell at me. I don't care. You're not going to offend me. So this is them listed out, and then I'll go independently. So the very first one is that there is the truth of suffering. Simple and complicated, right? That's number one. Number two, the truth of the cause of suffering. There's a truth to it. There's a truth to knowing that there is a cause for why we suffer. The third, I'm sorry if I'm going fast, I promise I'll repeat them. The third is that there is an end to said suffering. And the last one is that there is a path that we can follow that will lead us to the end of suffering. Have I said the word enough? So I'm going to just quickly say those things again. Suffering exists, number one. There's a reason why we suffer, number two. Number three, there's a way to end that suffering. Number four, there's an actual path that Buddha created to help us end suffering. And it's not just Buddhism, I should say that too. Buddhism is not like we're this religion and that's all you can be. You can be any religion and practice Buddhism as a philosophy or as a notion of just general practice. You do not have to be Buddhist or receive a Buddhist name to still practice these things. It's not like a mandatory step in practice. Again, that's a rabbit hole. There are sects of Buddhism that will say, yes, you do. And then if you do that, this is the next step and the next step and the next. And then the ultimate supposed goal is Nirvana, which is that end of suffering. But there's this paradox in Buddhism. If your only goal in life is to reach Nirvana, you're not doing it right. It's a really fundamental Buddhist teaching. Buddha himself had said that. If your goal in life is to reach Nirvana in this life, that's a whole other rabbit hole, right? In this life, you're not doing it right. Okay, so that first one, the truth of suffering. There are Sanskrit and Pali words for it. I am so bad at pronouncing, so I'm just not going to go there today. I'll just leave that one alone. This first one I do know, they call it dukkha. And so suffering was the easiest referencing that they could actually say in English to translate from the original meaning of the word. But suffering in the English language sometimes has a really rough inference. We really think that it means something really deep and dark, right? Like we think of like, oh, my dad died, suffering. My car broke down, suffering. I'm sick, suffering. But again, good things are also suffering. Too much desire and attachment, even though they're perceived as good, that's a form of suffering. So just know that for the first one, in life there is forms of suffering. You may hear it as that life is suffering, but it stems from typically the most common way that you hear in Buddhism is that it stems from wants and desires. So the act of trying to gain attachments or to, I'll just say it as this, to have greed. Greed can be anything. Greed can be too much food. Greed can be too much money or money. It doesn't have to be too much money. It can be money. Greed can just be like, well, I want what they have. Why don't I have that? Greed comes in many ways, or desires and wants. Well, I want them to love me more. I want to have good grades in school. It can come in all forms. So it just captures that universal notion that all beings, we call them sentient beings, that's beings that have the capacity to have thought, So that could even be animals, and I'm going to say bugs, because they got brains, most of them. Everything goes through a form of suffering. And so we acknowledge that. And that's a part of our practice is, again, it's that like, you suffer, I suffer, you suffer, I suffer, you suffer, I suffer. It may not be always identically the same thing at the same time, but in some way, we have suffered the same in our lifetimes. So like we may have experienced death, we've experienced desire. Those emotions are something that is universal, that we experience together. Not all at the same time, but together. Really great thing I hear that I like to pass this little nugget is that, simple saying, but you're ready for it, okay? Pain, take that as you will, whether it's physical or emotional, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. You can choose to not suffer. That sounds really complicated. I'll give you an example. Let's say you caught the flu or the cold, or name an illness, okay? You caught it. Could be severe, it could be mild, but it creates some discomfort within you. And your first thought is like, I just want this to go away. I'm suffering. I'm tired of feeling this way. So, but you can choose to suffer or not. It doesn't mean it'll make your illness go any faster, and it's okay to feel it. It's that same notion of sitting with that emotion and those feelings. Acknowledge that it sucks to feel like poo. It's okay. You know, sit with it for a little while and say, man, I just feel crappy, you know, and just say, what do I need to do to make myself feel better? Should I drink more water? Should I eat soup? Should I lay down in bed and not worry about cleaning my bedroom or whatever it is? Like, just give yourself those graces. But it's also the notion that I can sit and stew in all of my negativities if I choose to. I could be like, I feel horrible, and I can just, now somehow I just keep saying it over and over and over again, and it just makes me feel worse, and I just keep allowing myself that space to make myself somehow feel worse. And that is exactly what that means. You can choose to suffer or not. It's a practice. Sometimes it's hard. Like if you're really feeling crappy, you know, if you're really, really sick, it's not to say that you have to be like, okay, all right, I gotta practice Buddhism right now and make sure. It can help you sometimes. It can help you just make sure that you can sometimes at least have little gains, little wins. So if you're really sitting there and you're not feeling good, it could be emotionally too. If you're really struggling with something, you can just sit there and say to yourself like, okay, I acknowledge that I'm having really strong emotions. You can name it, name whatever it is. And then just sit with that one thing for a little while and say, okay, how do I change it? Can I change it? What am I responsible for? What am I not responsible for? Like, what do you have control over or not? That's one of the big fundamentals in that moment. How do you choose to suffer or not? Sometimes it could just be like, okay, I feel like crap. I acknowledge I feel like crap, but I'm gonna get out of bed. I'm just gonna walk around, and then I'm gonna lay back down again. And then I'm gonna rest, and I'll feel a little bit better, maybe. Sometimes it's just that small. Sometimes it's bigger. But you can choose to suffer. That was number one. Number two, that there's a truth to the cause of suffering. Again, it really just boils down to desire, the want. You can get as complicated with that or as simple as you really want to. I don't think I need to explain that one. Desire both good and bad. Desiring to have the benefit, desiring to get rid of the negative. Desire as you see it. But that is the absolute basis of that one. Last desire. I gave myself a 10-minute warning because I talked a lot. Okay, the third one. There is an end to suffering. So essentially there's a, quote, cure for suffering. So practicing in the way of what's called Buddha nature, or you'll often hear Thai Sifu, however you prefer to call him. You'll hear him say it's the original mind. The original mind refers back to what is called the Buddha mind. And that Buddha mindset is just that correct path of thinking. It's all the things we've been discussing. It's just acknowledging that these things exist and then sitting with them and allowing them to be as they are. And then practicing from there, which again, we'll continue learning about how you go forward with that. Just make sure I'm not missing anything in that one particular note. So a lot of times you hear that notion of like knowledge versus wisdom. Kai talks about that a lot. What's knowledge and what's wisdom? Knowledge is like reading the book, right? You can read a book 40,000 times and not understand a word of it. Wisdom is the difference between understanding those words in the book or reading it. When you understand it, it's wisdom. And so that's that same notion in Buddhism. When you practice it, when it doesn't mean you've perfected it, but the idea of practicing it in a way that you can move forward into another step within your own practice, that's wisdom, not just the knowledge. Because I could sit here right now, knowledge. Four pages. All right, so the last one. How do we stop suffering? So there is an actual path that Buddha said, yo, if you do this, you're going to suffer a whole lot less. Maybe not 100% until you reach to that like level, right? But there's a general way to do this. And so he said that the path is by following this correlative eightfold path. They stick with each other. So you have the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. They're kind of like siblings. They are hand in hand with one another. And it fits into this last part, which is the truth that there's a path to the end of suffering. It's by following what he set up as the Eightfold Path. I'm not going to go into the Eightfold Path today because, number one, Ty is doing it in meditation. And I'm just going to try to let him go through that. And then at some point we can round back on it as well. But feel free to look it up. Just because you're here doesn't mean you can't also look up other knowledge. And don't take everything that I say as truth. That's also one of the basic fundamentals of Buddhism, is that when you hear Dharma, and this is essentially Dharma because I'm speaking about Buddhist topics, right? I'm giving you lessons in Buddhism. Seek your own truth. If it doesn't sit right with you, you're like, but seek out that knowledge in other ways, not just in one place. And then come to the inferences for yourself so that you know if you feel that that is correct for yourself, that's what you practice. It's not just blind faith. It's not blind following. It's understanding. It's wisdom. It's knowing that you feel compelled in whatever way that may be for you to practice that way. And that nobody is responsible for the way you practice but you. Kai is not responsible to make sure that you are following certain steps. He's not gonna, like for example, he's not gonna go through confession with you if you're familiar with Catholicism or being Catholic. You don't sit with him in a booth and then confess that you had negative thoughts or, like it doesn't happen. Nobody's keeping track of that. There's no score, there's no tally. It's all yourself. And so you practice for you first. And then if you are practicing for others, you start here. Once you feel comfortable practicing here, you move to the next stage for others. Of course, there's that, you can do things for others at any given time. It doesn't mean like, well, I can't do anything for you right now. So don't take that literally. But yeah, the cure is following the Eightfold Path, which is what Buddha said, that if you practice that, and that it's the way we should practice and conduct ourselves throughout our life. That if we do practice that Eightfold Path, we begin to reduce our suffering. And again, he reiterated this topic, the Buddha did, that the truth of knowing is also that no one being or person is responsible for your suffering other than you. Sometimes that's a really hard pill to swallow. Nobody's responsible for it but you. We really want it to be somebody else's problem or fault or reason. So that is it in a nutshell. Like I said, it can be as complicated as you want it to be. I can go down really deep rabbit holes, but there's no need to. Buddha didn't make this difficult when he taught it. Don't get lost in the woods. Don't read a ton of books and be like, I'm so lost. Just focus on the practices. Learn the fundamentals. Practice those fundamentals. You'll be just fine. If you don't lose past that, fine. It's okay. So we have a few minutes. I can't believe it took, I thought this was going to be a whole lot less than that. Questions, comments, frustrations, brain farts.
As far as the everyone has pain, not everyone has to suffer.
A little louder.
As far as the everyone has pain, not everyone has to suffer. Just on that saying, don't feel bad or guilty if you're like, well, I'm choosing this for myself. Depending on where you are in practice, you may not have that option yet. I mean, you can't just, flip a switch and be like, oh, I'm going to choose not to be depressed. You may not have that option depending on where you are in practice. But if you follow the Eightfold Path, you can continue to meditate. It gets easier, it gets better, and then you can handle different situations better, and then you can start having that option to not suffer.
Yeah,
it's definitely different than like that toxic positivity of like choose happy.
Yeah,
It's
just
not that at all.
just get over it. Yeah.
Well, that is a good
You may
point
not
though
have
too,
that
because
option.
toxic positivity is a real thing too, and everyone thinks like, oh, it's just going to end suffering, and it's like, no. The point necessarily, it's a really big topic in Buddhism that can go really, really far, really deep into. That, the ultimate goal is if you do reach Nirvana. If you choose to reach Nirvana, let me say it that way as well, because you can choose to practice Buddhism and it doesn't have to be that doesn't have to be your end goal. Like, no one tells you that is the set path. Like, Nirvana doesn't have to be your goal. Sometimes it's just literally, like I said, the practice itself, that you can sit and have those small wins, even if it's just for a moment, that you can say, you know what? And when I say win, I don't mean that you stop suffering. I mean that you acknowledged that you were present in your mind, in your body, in that moment. That's what I mean by the win. We should be connected, and a lot of times we allow ourselves, our conscious mind, to be elsewhere when we meditate. We think about the outside world and the things going on around us, and we forget to be right here and right now. And again, it's those notions of like, when I first started practicing, so I have a condition called misophonia. If you're not familiar with that, like if people make mouth noises, in particular for me, it's mouth noises. It drives me bonkers! It sends me off the rails. Like, it's a thing. It's a real thing. And I didn't know it for a long time until I found that out. And I struggled so bad because it literally elicits like a form of anger, a deep anger. And I don't have control over it. It's just a mental thing. And it's not that I dislike the person who's doing it. It's just something that literally happens in the brain. And so for me, it was like, one day I sat with myself in meditation, and this was my small win. I was like, why am I getting so frustrated over hearing somebody making a noise that is somehow irritating me, right? Why am I irritated over that? I literally was asking myself this in meditation. And I was like, and I couldn't come up with a real answer. And sometimes there's a practice in Buddhism where you can do that, is ask yourself a question that literally has no answer. The first one I was ever taught by a monastic was, this was my favorite one that I picked out, was to ask yourself when you're in meditation, and it takes a while to get to this stage sometimes for some people, where I say to myself, what did my face look like before it was my face? I don't have an answer to that. I literally don't have an answer. I mean, I can make one up. If you're imaginative, you can do that. But it's a question without a real answer. And so you really, really think on it. Like, you think hard on it. And then you realize that there is no answer to that. And it allows you this space to just let it go. And that's how I was able to find little moments where I was with my own self at that time. That was my own personal practice. I'm not telling you to do that, but try it if you want. It goes right deep. The rabbit hole is long. Little wins. Just being present right now, acknowledging that you're alive. And so that's what I started doing. When I heard things that my brain was like, you're annoyed, and I was like, no, I'm not. But my brain was like, you're annoyed. I started acknowledging, why am I annoyed? Sometimes I did have a reason, sometimes I didn't. I mean, the reason could be obvious, right? They're making noise. Well, what kind of reason is that? Then I started transitioning it in my brain, where I said, well, I'm hearing them make noise, which means they're alive. Do I need to say any more? I mean, it's just that acknowledgement, to be glad that somebody is alive in that moment. It doesn't have to be in myself. Like, I can be happy that someone is alive. Hear me. Like, they're breathing, they're making mouth noises, they have the capacity to do these things, they're present here. Like, it could be as deeply and far contextual as you want it to be, but it can be real simple, just they're alive. And in that moment I smiled, and somehow I let it go. It happens again, don't get me wrong, but it's the same practice. I catch myself getting into a mindset, I tell myself, whoa, all right, I acknowledge I'm having this thought right now, what do I do with it? What do I have control over? Do I have control over it? What can I do for myself to end this form in this moment of suffering? And it was a desire, right? Because I wanted that noise to stop, so I would stop suffering. It's all those little things, they all tie into one another. Like I said, it sounds like a big topic, but it always comes back to the most simplest things. It's super simple, but it's also very complicated because it does take continual practice. And it's not that you beat yourself up when you don't win, when you don't move past it. You just acknowledge it. You say, ooh, man, I'm really struggling today. Like, if you find yourself not being able to move past it, you just say that. Like, you know what, I acknowledge today is not a good day to try to move past things. Maybe I'm gonna go get some Chinese food and call it a night. Like, you know, just whatever. So it doesn't always have to be a sense of winning. It's just really being present and acknowledging. So that's a big topic, little topic. Any other questions, comments, frustrations?
You said
can tell me you don't like me.
Did you want to find Nirvana?
Huh?
You said Nirvana a couple times. Do you want to, not like a big picture, but just because someone might be like, well, is
I'm
that like
just
going to
curious.
heaven or what is that?
Yeah, well, that's another,
How do we practice it?
that's a real deep rabbit hole. Again, there are sects of Buddhism that practice different theologies. And there's sometimes a sense of mysticism. My own personal practice, I don't follow it in what I would call a religious sense. Like, I don't personally believe that we live other lives. I'm open to the idea that it does exist, but I don't personally believe it. But I'm just open to it. If it happens, cool. Would I know it? Probably not. But, you know, I'm open to the idea that it does exist. I guess, what is it called? Being agnostic. Like, I'm open to the idea that there could be the sense of a God, right? There could be like the secular God that people talk about, or non-secular. I say that a lot. But I don't know. And I don't necessarily have the proof or not for it. So to me, it doesn't matter. I'm just existing right now. And all I know is I'm trying to do my best as who I am, both for myself and for others. Above all things, I'm human. You're human, and I acknowledge that. You know, like that's as simple as it needs to be. That's where I practice. But I do acknowledge that, you know, I like to learn these things too, because I'm like, okay, well, why do you practice that? Like, why are you a monk? Well, why did you tell me that I should or shouldn't do this? Like, questioning is a good thing. You should question everything you learn and then come to your own inferences about it. So Nirvana, essentially, in a nutshell, if I try to summarize everything I can think of, at least in Mahayana Buddhism, which is this sect of practice here at this temple, is the space for which you have moved past this earthly life and you no longer suffer. You become essentially a Buddha. And I'm going to throw you off for a loop if you've never heard this. Gautama Siddhartha, which is the Buddha we know, you often see depicted, and depending on where you go culturally, you'll see him depicted a little bit different. You see a lot of Vietnamese culture here, and the way that the face shape is and things, but you'll see him looking Thai, and you'll see him looking in other, especially Asian cultures. You'll see him looking Chinese, stuff like that. He was Indian, just to get that out there, if you didn't know that already. I very rarely see Buddha as an Indian. It bothers me. I'm like, I want the cultural accuracy, but it's okay. It's just, again, it's a reminder, right? It's how do you identify? It doesn't matter what Buddha looked like. It's just that notion of understanding. But he was the Buddha that we're most familiar with the current teachings, but there were other Buddhas before him, and there will be other Buddhas after him. We are all Buddha. That's the whole basis of teaching as well, is that we all have the Buddha mindset. We have that capacity within us, and we do it every day without even necessarily knowing that we're doing it sometimes, that we are essentially emulating being a Buddha. And then, like I said, there's also those other concepts where we have Bodhisattvas. And so I don't think I have enough time to talk about the Bodhisattvas today. Unless you all really want to stick around for that, we can go through it briefly. It's 1:37, so I want to give everyone the option.
As I said, for a longer class.
Huh?
As I said, for a longer class, you can actually.
Yeah, so I was like, we can go into that next time. But yeah, so Nirvana is literally the absence. It's the ultimate. It's like a form of heaven. And there are things in Buddhism, sects of Buddhism, that discuss the realms. And I'm going to throw you off for that loop real quick. There are realms. There are multiple heavens. And heaven isn't the way that we learn about it with like God, for example, right? We learn about like other religions and they talk about heaven and that's like the end. It's the ultimate. You reached it, right? In Buddhism, in heavens and in hells, and again, this is if you choose to believe this, you don't have to, that there are different realms, different layers, depending on how bad or how good you were, or how many lives you did good things, or how long you were a monk, and so on and so forth, in different lives. And you can actually die in these different realms and be reborn into another realm, whether it's the earthly realm, a different level of heaven, a different level of hell. You can have, like I said, that's a big topic. I don't usually touch on that in the beginner stuff because even I don't have the full understanding of that one. I've still just touched the tip of it. I've had conversations with one of the monastics here. Like we have little like mini dharmas where I have like way too many questions in my head, and then we'll come sit with him, and I'm like, okay, why this, why that? And he'll try to explain it. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, that don't sound right. Like it doesn't sit with me, and so I go back and I do more research, and I'm like, okay, I acknowledge that's cool. People practice that way. It exists. There's an understanding of it in a contextual way, but then I don't have to practice it that way. That's my own personal choice within my movement forward in life. So if you're like, oh man, that makes total sense. Great, practice that, learn more about it, do it. But I'm not telling you do or don't, it's just, it exists. Any other questions? I think I touched Nirvana a little bit at least.
Could I take 1 minute just to quickly do that?
Maya likes to teach.
So just very quickly, there's two very big ways to look at it. One is the way she expounded on the different heavens. And just remember, Buddhism came out of Hinduism. So that's who Buddha was trying to teach, were these people that had this background of Hinduism. So he had to relate that to them. And in some of his teachings, he does say you have to tailor this to the people. When it came to China, it turned into Zen Buddhism. And when it came to Japan, they had to change it a bit because of the culture. There is a secular way to practice too, which is that heaven is basically when you're not suffering, you're in heaven here. And hell is when you're thoroughly suffering. And nirvana is more just understanding and getting rid of that delusion. And you can do that now, and there's different levels. You can dip a toe into understanding, but if you don't keep up with practice, you pull that toe back out, or if you keep practicing, you can get deeper and deeper understanding to the point where you're no longer suffering and you can see through delusion, and that's a form of nirvana. Just all depends on how you want to
practice. Belief. Yeah, like I said, it's a lot of it is practice and belief. Different sects have different ways of sometimes even describing the same exact topic. Theravada is believed to be like the oldest style, the most true to what Buddha taught back in his time. So sometimes it's warranted. Like I always tell people, look into it. I mean, if that is your path, is to move forward in the way of practicing fully, I'll say that with a grain of salt, fully in Buddhism, meaning like if your goal for whatever reason is to become Buddhist, taking a name, all those things, then I would tell you really dive into that and see what sits right with you. Which sect of Buddhism do you like? There are sects of Buddhism, I can't ever say this one right, Maya says this, the Japanese one.
Ryo Kosekai?
Ryo.
Ryo.
Thank you. Oh, that's right. Sorry, I was like, I remember. Renata knows this one. So he's very familiar. Can I call you out on that? Yeah. So he attends a facility here in San Antonio, and this is nationwide, worldwide as well, where they believe you don't have to have a monastic to reach enlightenment. And the primary focus there is from the Lotus Sutra. That's what they read from. It's a text in Buddhism, but it's the Lotus Sutra, and that's one of Buddha's like main original teachings as well. So there's no monastics there. It's all community. You don't have to have a monk. So that's another one that throws people for a loop. We think that there's this entity, this being, this person that has to guide us, and it's not. The knowledge is there. It's there for you to find everywhere. It doesn't have to be one person, and I will say this personally, it shouldn't be just one person. The attachments that that's also another thing in Buddhism, don't attach, right? That's a deep topic, we'll go past that in another time. But learn from multiple resources, whether it's people, books, etc., learn from multiple resources. Because sometimes we don't get it right. Sometimes we mistake and we say things, we're all human. Sometimes what I say right now may not resonate with you, and then let's say you learn it from somebody else, you're like, wow, that totally clicked. Wonderful. Or you're like, ooh, that's even worse. It can go both ways. So, yeah, don't believe the first thing you hear. Kids are like, hurry up. All right, I want to give you all a break. If you're staying, meditation is still happening today. It's in the Buddha Hall. We start at 2 p.m. If you're going to stick around, please be in there no later than like 1:55. And I wanted to give you all time to have some brain space. And if you don't want to attend meditation, it's not a big deal either. I'm going to end real quick. If you guys can stand or sit, I'm just going to do a little bit of a bell. And I want to take just even a minute, if you have the space in your head, now that I filled it up, to just sit in the moment. That's it. And so when we hear a bell, no matter where you're at, that's exactly what it means, is to come back. So it's also a guidance for you to come back to this exact moment. Sometimes it helps catch you, like if you're like, ooh, thinking about dinner, come back to here and now, right now. So close your eyes, don't close your eyes, whatever your preference is, doesn't bother me either way, whatever you like. And then just take a few breaths and practice being right here and right now. So I'll ring the bell 3 times, take a few breaths, and then you can be done, okay? So thank you, everyone, for coming to the first one. I absolutely welcome any of your comments. If I gave too much, too little, let me know, please. And then I'll try to come up. I work with Ty as far as like when he allows for me to come, and especially like what dates are available. So like this one was based on when he says, okay, we have some availability, some room to do this. So it may be next month, probably, when we do the next one. And I'll touch on the Bodhisattvas, and then I'll see what other topics I can hit on that are sort of more basics. There's plenty out there. I might also just start back and come back to things he's talking about in the Eightfold Path, and then we'll just start doing one at a time and learning deeper into that. or if you end up having a topic that you're like, I really want to learn more about that, email, whatever it may be, look more into that, see if that's something I'm capable of teaching, and then we can go that route. So thank you.